Hi everyone, welcome to our webinar, How to Reach Your College Savings Goals with a 529 Plan. I'm Katie Flynn and I'm the Director of Content at Savingforcollege.com, where I make sure we're providing the right types of content and information to help families and professionals better understand how to meet the challenges of paying for education. Thank you all for being here today, and I'd also like to take a minute to thank our sponsor, College Choice CD 529 Savings Plan. College Choice CD is an FDIC insured 529 plan offered by the Indiana Education Savings Authority and managed by College Savings Bank, a division of Next Bank SSB and offered nationwide. College Choice CD is designed to help individuals and families save for higher education in a principal-protected, tax-advantaged way and offers valuable features including a tax-deferred growth, generous contribution limits, and a variety of attractive FDIC-insured products from CSB. In addition, there are no fees, no income limits to open an account, or age limits for the beneficiaries. During today's presentation, we'll be answering questions that were submitted with registrations, and we'll also be taking live questions. So if there's something you'd like to ask during any part of the webinar, just enter it into the question box on your control panel. We'll do our best to respond to as many questions as we can during the hour, but if your question doesn't get answered, please visit our forum at forum.savingforcollege.com. And we will go ahead and get started. Also, everyone who's registered for this webinar has been entered into a drawing to win a free copy of our updated book, Savingforcollege.com's Complete Guide to 529 Plans. And I'll announce the winner at the end of this presentation. Joining me today is Matthew Toner, one of the advisors here at Savingforcollege.com and at GradVisor. So why save for college? We all know college is expensive and that student debt is a growing problem. That's why we're all here. And today we want to show you how saving for college can be the solution to the student debt problem. Every dollar you save for college today is one less you'll have to borrow in the future. There are many different ways to save for college. Looking at the table, we have the 529 plan, the Coverdell Education Savings Account, and the Roth IRA, which are all common ways families save for college because they all offer tax-free withdrawals when you use them to pay for college. But there are some important differences. One of the biggest advantages of saving with a 529 plan is that you can change the beneficiary without tax consequences to a qualifying family member. So let's say your child decides not to go to college or you end up saving more than you need. With a 529 plan, you're able to change the beneficiary of the account to a sibling or niece or nephew who will be going to college. A common question we get, and we also got this from Christine during the registrations, is why is a 529 plan better than maxing out your IRA? One of the reasons that you might want to choose the 529 over the IRA is that anyone can open a 529. So depending on your income, you might not even be eligible to use a Roth IRA. So with a 529 plan, you can't be too rich or too poor. There are also no annual contribution limits for 529 plans. But with a Coverdell ESA or a Roth, you have limits. With the Coverdell, it can only be $2,000 per beneficiary, and with the Roth, it can only be $5,500 or $6,500 if you're over 50. 529 plans only have an aggregate contribution limit, which is determined by the state, and some of these could be as high as $500,000. Also with a Roth, you want to be careful when you're withdrawing from a Roth IRA to pay for college because that can be counted as income on the student's FAFSA. And with a 529 plan, there are no financial aid implications with the withdrawals. As far as investment options go, your investment options in the 529 plan will be limited to what the program offers. 529s don't offer self-directed investments like a Roth, but the portfolios are managed by investment professionals whose main objective is to maximize your college savings. And in a little while, Matt's going to go into investment options in some more detail. When we look at qualified expenses of the different savings options, just want to say, remember, in order to take advantage of any education tax breaks, you have to spend the funds on what's considered qualified expenses. 529 plans offer a broad definition of qualified expenses. At eligible colleges, this includes tuition, fees, books, computers, room and board if the student's enrolled at least half-time. And as of January 1st, you can even withdraw up to $10,000 per year to pay for K through 12 tuition. Now, if you are saving for private elementary or high school, you also have the option of choosing a Coverdell Education Savings Account. But once again, you're limited to that $2,000 per year per beneficiary. And it's important to note that with the 529 plan right now, that only includes K through 12 tuition. But if you did use the Coverdell, you could use that to pay for other expenses, including books, supplies, academic tutoring, in some cases, room and board, even uniforms and transportation. So those extra costs right now are only eligible if you're using the Coverdell. And of course, the custodial accounts, the UGMA, you can use those for just about anything as long as it's for your child. But unlike a 529 where the account owner retains control over the life of the account, if you have an UGMA or UTMA, your child will gain control of those assets when he or she reaches legal age. So they can basically use it for whatever they want, even if that's not
Hey, Katie.
college. Yes.
We did have a question come in. Nish wants to know, do we get the same tax benefits through 529 plans as we get through a Roth IRA?
You do. You get the federal tax-free earnings in the account, but a 529 sometimes offers additional tax benefits depending on what state you live in. So if you live in one of the 34 states that offers a state tax deduction or credit for your contributions, you would get that on top of the federal tax savings. So that's the biggest
Yeah,
difference.
and I will add on to that, Katie, that with a Roth IRA, you have to remember that they're only going to be tax-free withdrawals if you are over 59 and a half by the time your child needs to tap that account to use it for college. So I want to make sure everyone keeps that in mind as well.
Okay, Lori asks, does the student need to attend an in-state college to use 529 funds? No, you can use a 529 savings plan to pay for just about any eligible institution. That includes private schools, public schools, 4-year, 2-year, in-state or out of state. However, if you're using a prepaid 529 plan, they may have more limitations. And Matt, I believe you're going to go over those in a few minutes.
Yep.
And then we had a question from RJ, are there any situations where room and board is a qualified expense? I did mention quickly that room and board is considered qualified, but I will let you know that room and board is a qualified expense for 529s as long as the student is enrolled at least half time. And that includes both on and off campus housing. So if your child is living in an apartment, your qualified room and board cost must be less than or equal to what's included in your school's cost of attendance allowance for room and board. So if your child is going to live in an apartment, what you can do is get that information from the school's financial aid office, and then you'll be able to withdraw that amount tax-free from your 529. Don also asked, can 529 plans be used for college entrance exams and other preparatory activities? Unfortunately, only tuition fees, book supplies, and equipment related to enrollment or attendance at an eligible institution are considered qualified. So these kind of fees that are paid prior to the student's acceptance would be considered non-qualified. And that means they're subject to income tax and a 10% penalty on the earnings portion of the withdrawal. William
Katie,
had asked, yeah.
Oh, sorry. I just wanted to, real quickly, Todd, live question coming in here. Do tuition expenses cover alternative options like trade or vocational schools?
In most cases, they do. So what you would want to do to confirm that is if you go to savingforcollege.com, we have a tool called See If Your Institution is Eligible. And there's a place where you can enter in the name of the school. So some trade schools and vocational schools are eligible, but just to confirm, you'd want to use that tool, enter in the name of the school, and make sure it comes up on that list. So that could be anything from trade school, beauty school, culinary school. There's a whole bunch of different options. And William asks, is a computer or laptop a qualified expense? If used but not required, it seems like the laws changed. William, you're correct. The signing of the Protecting Americans from Tax Height, the PATH Act in 2015, did make computers and related equipment a permanent qualified expense. So that's good news for everyone. Those kind of costs can get expensive. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Matt Toner, and he's going to go into more detail about 529 plans and how they work.
All right, great, Katie. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at 529 plans from kind of a high-level view, what they are, how they work, what kinds there are, et cetera, because I'm sure we have a lot of questions just about how these seemingly innocent products, how they can get very complicated very quickly. So let's kind of untangle the web here. So what is a 529 plan? So essentially, at the end of the day, the government created these investment vehicles to help families set aside money for future educational expenses. So the way they work operationally is similar to a Roth IRA, not like a 401k. A lot of people have the misunderstanding that these are some sort of pre-tax investment vehicles, but they are not. So post-tax dollars are going to go into this account. Those monies will be invested into the stock market, sometimes their certificate of deposit or a high yield savings account, an FDIC insured account, and then that account is going to go up and down according with the market or according to whatever your yield is going to be. And then, as Katie went over, when you use those monies for qualified higher education expenses and now K through 12 tuition as well, all the gains in those accounts are completely tax-free. So a lot of federal tax advantages here. So I know Greg had asked before the webinar, are there any advantages to using a 529 plan over simply investing in the stock market? Well, Greg, this is a huge one right here, is you're going to be avoiding those capital gain taxes that are kind of unavoidable when investing simply into the stock market. So there are over 90 different 529 plans from across the country. They're run at the state level, so every state, except for the state of Wyoming, will have at least one 529 plan. Some, like Virginia, may have 2, 3, or 4. But as an investor, you can invest in any one of these plans from across the country, except for a few exclusions, like, for example, Louisiana or South Carolina, West Virginia, where you're going to have residency requirements in order to open those up. But you can live in Florida, open up the Illinois 529 plan or Indiana 529 plan, and then your kid can go to college in California. It all works the same. So we'll get into a little bit later about how we should really be thinking about which 529 plan to open. So just for now, we'll kind of stick to the basics. So as I said, they're run at the states, but many times a state will partner with a plan manager to run that plan for them. So you can see some of the names here at the bottom: College Savings Bank or T. Rowe Price or BlackRock. So when you are actually investing in these are the institutions that are kind of choosing the investment options, setting fees, holding your funds, and actually investing your money. So when you open up the Alaska T. Rowe Price plan or the College Savings Bank plan, you're going to be investing your money with T. Rowe Price or College Savings Bank. So to go over some more benefits here of 529 plans, and I think everybody will see pretty quickly that these are really, really powerful vehicles when it comes to saving for college and, well, of course, now K through 12 tuition as well. So I alluded to the federal tax advantages earlier, but over 30 states also offer an additional state tax incentive for contributions into a 529 plan, meaning that you are going to get, in some states, an additional state tax credit or state tax deduction that you're going to be able to take for contributions into the plan. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in depth when we go over how to choose a 529 plan as well. Next, crowdfunding. So unlike a 401k, when it's only you or your employer that's contributing to this account, you can invite anyone and everyone to contribute to your 529 plan. So this is a really great way to increase your savings by asking friends and family members to contribute during holidays or birthdays or graduations, etc. So I believe that the last Sallie Mae report had something along the lines of about 11% of college savings is coming from friends and family these days. So some plans out there are making it very easy for friends and family to contribute online. Some of them, unfortunately, are a little bit antiquated, where you still have to send in some sort of paper check. But regardless, anyone can contribute to these accounts. So I highly encourage everyone, ask friends and families to help around those birthdays and stuff. So because it's really going to make a difference in the long run. Next, flexibility. So 529 plans are a pretty versatile product. I don't want anybody to think that they're investing their money in there and then all of a sudden their kid doesn't go to school or they want to use it for a different child, et cetera, that there's no options, because there are a lot of options. So first, I'd like to mention that you can change your 529 plan once every rolling 12 months. So let's say that you open up the Florida plan because you live in Florida, and then all of a sudden you move to New York 2 years later, and that New York plan is offering you a state tax deduction. Well, you can roll over those assets into that New York plan if need be. In addition, you can change your investment options twice in a calendar year, and this is a pretty recent development. It used to be just once. Now you can change the actual investment option that you're going to be in twice a year. I get a lot of questions about, what if my kid doesn't go to school, or what if he or she gets a scholarship? Well, if you get a scholarship, you can remove the amounts of the scholarship from your 529 plan without any kind of penalty. So let's say they get a scholarship worth $10,000, you can remove $10,000 from the account penalty free. If your child ends up not going to school, you have a few options. So I think I saw one of the questions that were coming in. You can rename the beneficiary. So if you or your spouse want to be the beneficiary, you can do so. You can change it to any qualified family member, which is a pretty wide net. So different siblings, cousins. So there are options to change that beneficiary. So say your oldest doesn't go to school, you can go ahead and change the beneficiary to a younger child, and then he or she can use that account. If there are no options for you, if you have no reason to have that money in a 529 plan anymore, you don't want to just let it sit because there's no timetable of when you can actually need to use these funds, and you just want to let it sit for potential grandchildren down the line. If you don't want any of those options, you can still remove the money from the account, but it will be much similar to removing money from a Roth IRA before you're 59 and a half. It will be referred as a non-qualified withdrawal. So then just the earnings portion, your principal is never touched, the amount you contribute. So just the earnings portion is going to be subject to normal income taxes and a 10% penalty. Elaine, before the webinar, asked, can I switch/transfer a plan that was set up through an advisor to a direct sold plan to avoid those high advisor fees? Absolutely. As I said, as long as it's been a year since that plan has been opened. But I will say there are some caveats. You should really check with your advisor, or you're going to have to read the fine print, because some share classes may establish some sort of minimum time periods that the funds need to be invested in. Otherwise, you are subject to penalty. What I will say is that if that's something that you might be subject to, just go ahead. If you're, let's say, contributing $200 a month to that plan right now, just go ahead and open up a new plan, and then reroute your contributions there. And then whenever the time period is up, the penalty period is up, go ahead and roll over those assets into that new 529 plan that you've opened, because you can have multiple plans open for a child. Eric asks, for multiple kids with separate 529 accounts, is it possible to use funds from a sibling's 529 account? Once again, absolutely. So as I said about renaming the beneficiary, you can also transfer a portion of the assets from one plan to another. So let's say you need another $2,000 to cover tuition, and you have some extra money in your younger child's 529 account. You can roll over a portion of those assets into the older child's 529 plan without any kind of tax implications.
Matt,
go ahead.
I'm going to interrupt for 1 second. You had mentioned switching from an advisor sold plan to a direct sold plan, but we've got a question. What's the difference between an advisor sold and a direct sold plan?
So I'll keep that high level right now, as it is something that we'll go over in a little bit. But an advisor sold plan must be opened through some sort of financial advisor. These plans usually have more investment options, but then you're also going to be paying a little bit higher in fees, usually on average, and you also may be paying that advisor for opening that plan for you. A direct sold plan can be opened up by anyone usually for free. So if you want to start the Indiana 529 plan, you can go to the Indiana 529 plan website and go ahead and open it up. Usually these have a little bit less investment options to choose from, but they usually carry on average much less fees than an advisor sold plan. But yeah, we'll get a little bit more into that in a little bit. As Katie, I think, mentioned this earlier, for 529 plans, no income restrictions. So no kind of phase outs like there are with other investment products. Doesn't matter how much or how little you make, you can open up a 529 plan. Minimum financial aid impact. So assets in a 529 plan actually receive pretty preferential treatment when it comes to applying for that FAFSA. But once again, I'm not going to get into this too much because Katie is going to have a whole section about 529 plans and financial aid. So if you are somebody who has some questions around that, please stick around. And last, high contribution limit. So in most cases, you can contribute over $400,000 to a 529 plan, and that's because they want you to be able to save for not only undergraduate studies, but a graduate degree if your child wants to pursue that as well. And on this topic, Prakash did ask before the webinar, is there a limit to the amount you can deposit to contribute to a 529 plan? Doesn't matter if you make it lump sum or monthly contributions. So I'll get into this because it's a little complicated. So technically, there is not any limits to the amount you contribute except for that around $400,000 number that I mentioned. However, there are certain situations where there are tax implications. So every year you can contribute up to the annual gift tax exclusion. So for 2018, that's $15,000, which means that if you're a single filer, you can contribute up to $15,000 a year without any tax implications. Or if you're a joint filer, $30,000. One caveat, that 529 plans allow you to, quote unquote, what's colloquially known as super funding. So you can choose to do 5 years worth of those gifts up front, meaning if you're a single filer, up to $75,000 and joint filers, $150,000 right at once. So that's very attractive for sometimes grandparents who want to use it as an estate planning tool. If you go over any of those amounts I mentioned, either per year or that 5-year limit, it's going to reduce your lifetime gift tax exemption, which I believe for 2018 is around $5.6 million. So if you contribute an extra $5,000, $5,000 will come off that lifetime exemption.
I think it's double that, Matt. I think it's 11.8.
Oh, look at that. So I hope there's some people on here that have that problem. So good for you. So next, Ginny asked before we started, what's the best age to start saving for your child's education? And my response to this is always the same. The best thing to do is just to get started. The earlier you can start, the better. You can always increase, decrease, start, stop your contributions over time, but compound interest is really your best friend. You can see from this chart here just how big of a friend it can be. So if you're putting in $200 a month, 6 years could be the difference from over $40,000. So I always like to encourage people, let's go ahead and get that account open. As I said, we can change investment options. We can change how much you're contributing. But a lot of times, just because of the way life works, you say you're going to start saving, you blink an eye, and 2 or 3 years go by, and you totally forget about it. So always best if you can start early. And then we always hear the question, is it ever too late? And it's never too late. So some investors may ask themselves how they can protect their principal college savings investment, but still take advantage of these 529 plan benefits. Well, some plans do offer FDIC insured investment options, which essentially allow investors to remove risk and guarantee their returns. Obviously, the downside of this is that you're kind of limiting your upside potential if you just invested into a mutual fund or an index fund, which is more towards the graph from the last slide. A popular investment, FDIC insured investment, is a certificate of deposit, much like College Savings Bank offers through Indiana's College Choice CD. This investment option guarantees you a rate of return for a certain period of time. The longer period of time you allow them to have your money, the slightly higher interest rate you're going to get on those funds. However, there is a penalty if you remove the funds before that term period is over. So as you can see here, these are different scenarios under different term periods. So a 1-year term period, 2-year term period, 3-year term period. Obviously, you're going to get little different rates of return accordingly, but still can be a very, very powerful product. So this is a ideal type of structure for those people who are maybe about to go to college, those wanting to save for the K through 12 tuition. Grandparents are a big fan of this type of product, and pretty much anyone who considers themselves a conservative investor, because as I said, this is a guaranteed return. So when Christina asked, when is it too late to start a 529 plan? It's never too late. This is a great type of product if it is later. Maybe your child's going to school in 2 or 3 years. And this is especially the case if you live in one of those states, as we mentioned earlier, that offers you some sort of tax incentive on opening those plans, because you can still get that tax deduction a year beyond what they're offering you here. So Katie, any questions come in before we go into this next section here?
You know what? I have some questions for the next section. So if you want to go ahead and get started.
Okay. All right. So let's go ahead and get into this. And I'll kind of take a brief, but we have 4 different sections we'll go over within this one. So I'll take a brief stop after each one and take any questions. So let's get into how we need to think about what 529 plan I should really be opening, which one is going to be the best for me, because that's why people come to Savingforcollege.com. That's why they do their research, because they're really asking themselves, which one of these things do I need to open, since I can open pretty much any of them. So does not offer a prepaid plan, you can always invest in the private tuition 529 plan, which operates the same way and has about 300 of our nation's top schools under its umbrella. So we did have a few questions about prepaid plans. So Lisa asked, how are prepaid savings valued if a student goes to an out-of-state college? So as you know, for example, we have the Florida 529 plan down here where I'm located. I can open that up, and if my child were to go to one of those schools, great. But there is always a case where perhaps they get into a school out of state, so people want to know how that works. Well, each prepaid plan is a little different. However, many of them pay out an amount equal to the weighted average tuition and contractually specified fees at your state's public institution, not to exceed the actual tuition. So if you go somewhere that's cheaper, they're not going to be paying that difference. But if your plan is worth, let's say, $127 a credit hour at the time, they will pay out that equivalent at an out-of-state school. But this does cause a little uncertainty, right? So depending on the type of college your child ends up going to, you may have a little too much, you may have a little too little. So you have to ask yourself, what are the trade-offs here? And this could be an entire separate webinar in itself, but here's a few things to consider. While the prepaid plan is definitely safer, usually more guaranteed option, it might not be affordable for all families. So a contract might start out at $200 or $250 a month, and that's how much you're going to have to pay. So that might not be a viable option for some families when they can just open up a savings 529 plan for as little as $25 a month. Also, as I said, prepaid costs are tied to your state's institutions. So as I said, I live in Florida. Florida has pretty good schools, and they're very, very cheap for residents. So if I were to open up that prepaid plan and then my child ends up getting into Harvard, I could have a huge, huge savings gap now because I thought that was my college savings solution. So it may be the case where even if you open up one of those prepaid plans, you may want to supplement it with the 529 savings plan that I'll get into right now. So the 529 savings plan is what most people think of when they think of a 529 plan, and the fact that you choose an investment option, your money goes in, and then it goes up and down with the stock market. And then these savings plans are divided into broker sold, advisor sold, quote unquote, and direct sold, which was asked about earlier. So as I said, direct sold, you can open up yourself. And advisor sold, you'll need a financial advisor to open up, usually higher fees, but more investment options to choose from. So DeJohn asked before the webinar, does it ever make sense to go with an advisor sold plan? Well, I would say in this situation, obviously everyone's situation is different, but in most cases, if you're simply going to be choosing an age-based investment option, which we'll cover in a little bit, like the majority of parents do, I would say it's not worth it. However, if you are a more savvy investor and you would like to build a certain type of portfolio, maybe you want some foreign equities and domestic equities to balance it out, and then maybe some real estate investment options, going with an advisor-sold plan could make a lot of sense because you generally are going to have a much wider range of investment options. So we also had some questions here about this. Allison asked before the webinar what the advantages are to the prepaid 529 plan versus this traditional savings option. Once again, this could be a whole separate webinar, but as I said, the prepaid plan is a much more kind of guaranteed plan. Some of these prepaid plans aren't quote unquote guaranteed by the state, but they're generally pretty good. But as I said, you're pretty much putting money in and you know that you're going to have, if you buy the 4-year tuition package, you're going to have 4 years covered if your child goes to an in-state school. The savings plan is going to leave some questions because obviously it's usually going to be tied to the stock market. But again, if you want to go with a regular savings plan and you still want that kind of guarantee, you could go with a FDIC insured product like that College Choice CD from College Savings Bank.
Matt, we've got a couple questions about opening a plan. Would you like to take those now?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so first we have a question. Can you open an account before your child is born?
Yeah, absolutely. So the way that would work, and obviously this is a lot of parents are doing this. So if you are expecting, you can go ahead and open up a 529 plan, name yourself or your spouse as the beneficiary at the time you open that account. And then when your child is born and has a social security number, pretty simple. It's usually about a one-page form that you'll have to fill out, naming the new beneficiary, and that will just be a change of beneficiary form, and then your child will be the new beneficiary. So a pretty simple process.
Right. Actually, I did that. So I can confirm that it's easy just to usually find the form on the plan's website. And then the other question is, what about siblings? Should you be opening a new plan when a sibling is born, and should you have a plan for each child?
I always like to say absolutely. Because if you just think about how you should be setting up a 529 plan, unless all your children are, you have triplets or something like that, perhaps you can just have one for now. But if you're going to have, 2 children or 3 children, you should have 2 529 plans or 3 529 plans. It's going to affect, obviously, how much is college going to cost in the future? How much do I need to be saving every month? It will definitely affect what investment option you should be in. Your newborn shouldn't be invested the same as if you have a 7-year-old. So you should always have separate 529 plans for individuals. And as I said, there's a lot of flexibility, so don't get too caught up in the minutia. If you do need to transfer assets from one to the other, you're more than welcome to do so.
You know, it's also important to note that 529 plans can only have one beneficiary. So even if you do have triplets, you might want them on the same investment path. However, when it's time to withdraw those funds, you can only withdraw for the benefit of one child.
That's a great point, Katie.
So yeah, I mean, eventually you will have to make a change, even if you do have kids that are the same age.
Okay, let's moving on. So step 2, I would say, always check your state's tax incentives. Something that we've talked about a lot so far during this webinar. So this is a perfect time to address Frederick's question. Are there any advantages to investing in the 529 plan offered in my home state? Well, the answer is there definitely could be. So as I said earlier, over 30 states offer some sort of tax deduction or credit for contributions into 529 plans. But however, just like everything with 529 plans, it's not that simple. So as you can see, checking out this chart here, this graphic, these are all the different states that are offering some sort of deduction. However, some of them have residency requirements in order to get that deduction. And what I mean by that is that if you live in a state like New York or Indiana or Illinois, you have to you have to 1, live there, and then 2, open up your home state's plan in order to get that deduction. So New York offers up to a $10,000 state tax deduction. If you live in New York and you open up the Georgia 529 plan, you're foregoing that deduction. And then there are a few great states that we call tax parity states. Those are Arizona, Arkansas, Kansas, Missouri, Minnesota, and Montana and Pennsylvania. So these are great because you can open up any 529 plan and still get that state tax deduction. So for the people who may be in Phoenix on this webinar, you can shop the best plan nationwide. You can open up a New York plan or Indiana plan or California plan and still get that tax deduction a year. So those are great states. But I will also say, buyer beware sometimes with this. Do check the fees on your plan, because sometimes those state tax incentives can essentially be wiped out because the plan has higher fees. So make sure that you're kind of weighing all your different things. And we'll talk about that in a second appropriately. Any questions on this, Katie, before we hop over to the next section?
No, I think we're good on this section.
Okay, great. I know I wanted to give myself 5 more minutes. I think we're wrapping up perfectly here. So the next is going to be research and compare. So there's a few other things that we really need to be considering. First is who's the plan manager, like the one I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation. Are they well known? Have they been around for a while? Obviously, you don't want to wake up one day and that financial institution doesn't, exist anymore. But obviously, these are all vetted out by the state, so you're usually in good hands. Next is fees. This is obviously a pretty obvious one. People don't want to pay a lot if they don't have to. So fees can vary widely. So you can have all the way from down to 12 basis points all the way up to about 130 basis points. So that's definitely something you want to consider. Keep an eye out, because those fees can really eat into your earnings over time. Next, investment options. Does the plan you want to invest in have a wide range of investments? If I'm a conservative investor, does the plan have an FDIC insured or CD product like the one College Savings Bank offers? How risky should my portfolio be? Do they have certain portfolios that are going to fit my risk if I want a super aggressive or super conservative portfolio? Next, performance. Another pretty obvious one here. Better returns mean more money at the end of the day. So keep an eye on how your plan has performed over time. 1 year, 3 year, 5 year, 10 year. Obviously, you want a plan that's got great 10-year returns if it's possible to find one. And I will say, if you're having trouble with all of this, there are some fantastic tools on Savingforcollege.com. Check out our 5-cap ratings, which kind of evaluates a plan overall. We have great comparison tools if you want to compare by fees, compare by performance, et cetera, et cetera. You can find those tools on Savingforcollege.com.
Right. And so Cindy is asking, what is a good annual return for a 529 plan? And I think what we would say is that, these plans do follow the stock market. So what you want to do is compare your plan to other plans. And the 529 plan rankings on savingforcollege.com are a great way to do that, because you can see different time periods. You can see the list of the top performing plans.
That's exactly right. If you're looking at, because it could be the case where right now a good 1-year return is 17%, but if this was 2007, a good 1-year return could have been 3%. So it's always going to be relative. So if you're looking for the most up-to-date information, head to savingforcollege.com. Have our performance rankings right there for you. You can look at the best 1, 3, 5, 10, and sort through that way.
Right. And someone also asked about the investment strategy for a younger child. They're asking, is it smart to start out with more aggressive investments?
Well, that's a perfect segue here, Katie, into step 4 here. So the last thing we're going to have to do is choose an investment option here. So there's a few factors that we want to consider. Obviously, the type of investment option. We'll go over these. Static, age-based, FDIC insured. We have to be considering the fees, like I had mentioned. We have to consider your own risk tolerance. So not only talking about how old the child is, how comfortable are you with taking on risk? And lastly, your investment horizon, which addresses your question. How long is it going to be before I need to use this account? If your child's 2 years away from college, you likely don't want to be invested in 100% equities in case there's a market downturn. If your child's 0, you can still go through a market downturn and then make up those losses over time by being heavily invested in equities. So all stuff that we really need to consider. Going into the different types of investment options. So the first one will be a static investment option. So essentially what these are is these portfolios have a very specific investment objective, and their asset allocation will not change over time. So what I mean by that is that if you choose a portfolio that has 75% equities, 25% bonds, equities are obviously aggressive, bonds are obviously conservative, this will not change no matter how close your child gets to college. So don't blindly invest in a 100% equity portfolio and then completely forget about your 529 plan because you're just putting in $100 every month. Because as I said, if there's a market downturn a year away from college, that $50,000 you might have in there might turn down to 30. So definitely keep an eye on that. And this helps address the question from Vinay. Are there any 529 plans with mutual funds as investment options, or is it all index funds? Well, plans will definitely have both, Vinay. So there will be passive index funds. You can have actively managed funds. There's socially responsible investing funds. So as I mentioned earlier, if you're one of those investors who's really seeking a wide array of investment options, I would look towards an advisor sold plan. Or that's one of the things you can compare on savingforcollege.com. How many different investment options does this plan have? So if you're looking for that, head there as well. The next investment option I want to go over is an age-based investment option, and these are super, super popular amongst parents these days. A lot of the money in direct sold plan are going into these investment options because it's semis set it and forget it. I don't like to tell people to do that, but what I mean by it is that these portfolios are automatically going to become more conservative as your child gets closer to college. So your portfolio may be invested 100% in equities when the child's a newborn, and then by the time they're going to college, it could be in 10% or 0% equities. So money managers have picked kind of a glide path, what it's known as, and it will automatically become more conservative over time. And lastly are FDIC insured 529 plan investment options. These typically are made up of low risk investment options such as savings accounts or certificates of deposit. We discussed those earlier. As I mentioned, these investment options guarantee you a rate of return over a certain time period, and there's that penalty if you remove it before then. So if you choose that 3-year option, you take it out 2 years, could be subject to a penalty. Once again, a perfect investment option for those about to go to college, those saving for K through 12, grandparents. Even if you're already in college, let's say your kid's in their freshman year, you get the New York tax deduction. Go ahead and put $10,000 into it in a 1-year FDIC insured. Get that state tax deduction, and then maybe get a little bit of return on it as well.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, Matt, because we actually did receive a few questions about whether or not you can have more than one plan for the same child. And as you mentioned, the answer is yes. And if you do want to mix up, your different investments, a good way to do that is to look at these different types of products and mix them together.
Yep, absolutely. So I'll just wrap up here, just addressing Ruth's last question. Are 529 plans FDIC insured? Ruth, the plans themselves are not FDIC insured. The investment options are what you have to look at for the FDIC insured. So as I said, College Savings Bank offers numerous FDIC insured investment products through the Indiana, Arizona, and Montana 529 plans. So Katie, I'll let you kind of take back over unless we have any final questions on this here.
I think we are ready to move on.
Okay, great. Go ahead. Take it away.
Thanks, Matt. I'm pretty sure Matt's convinced everyone now that a 529 plan is the way to go if you're saving for college, but many parents are hesitant because they're afraid that it might hurt your chances of getting need-based financial aid. The short answer is the 529 will affect financial aid eligibility, but that impact will depend on who owns the account, and it's usually very minimal. So we'll start by talking about the FAFSA, which is the free application for federal student aid, and the EFC, which is your expected family contribution. So just also want to announce that the FAFSA kickoff, you can start turning in your FAFSA forms October 1st, so it's about 2 weeks away. So if you have children heading to college, you might want to do that as soon as possible. The amount of financial aid that a student receives is going to depend on your EFC, or expected family contribution. And this is the amount that the college expects you to be able to pay out of pocket. The formula used to calculate EFC uses information that you enter on the FAFSA. And I mean, a lot of times what the college expects you to be able to pay might not be what you think you're able to pay. So this is pretty important to understand. And this is going to include income and assets of the parent and the student. And now the student's income and assets are going to have the greatest impact on financial aid, as you can see from the table. Now let's talk about 529 plans in the FAFSA. So Brian asked, does putting money in a 529 plan decrease the likelihood of getting financial aid? And Kirsten had asked before the webinar, I opened a plan in my daughter's name, and now I have heard that it will count as her asset. Well, Brian and Kirsten, I have some good news for you. 529 plans receive favorable treatment on the FAFSA. So the account, whether it's owned by the parent or a dependent student, is going to be considered a parent asset. Now, with parent assets, the first 20,000 or so are going to fall under the asset protection allowance and will not be counted. The exact amount of the allowance is going to depend on the parent's ages, so it's going to depend, but on average, it's around $20,000. So any amount above that allowance is counted at a maximum of 5.64% of the 529 account value. So in order for 529s to have any effect as an asset, it would have to be above that allowance, and then it's only going to be that 5.64%. If we compare that to what other student assets, how they affect the FAFSA, they're counted at 20%. So that means if your student has an UGMA account, that value will be counted as 20% on the FAFSA. But the best part is the withdrawals. 529 plans, when you withdraw to pay for college, nothing is reported as income on the FAFSA. And normally student income is counted at 20%. So that's a huge benefit for 529 plans. They do receive this favorable treatment. And just to reiterate, they're counted as a parent asset, not a student asset. We also received a bunch of questions about grandparent-owned 529 plans. I mean, you probably heard that they may hurt financial aid eligibility, and that's true, but there are workarounds. So we'll talk about that for a minute. Matt, unless there's any questions on this slide?
Yeah. Rob had asked, while your child is in college, do you have to fill out FAFSA every year?
Yes, you do. A FAFSA is a yearly form. So if you have a child that's a senior in high school up to a junior in college this year, make sure you're filling out that FAFSA. Some of the financial aid is first come, first served. So if you can fill it out as close to October 1st as possible, that would be great.
That's all we got right now.
Okay, we're going to move on to the grandparent section. I know we received quite a few questions before the webinar, so hopefully we can go through this and explain everything. Specifically, we received a question from Ernest. Are these plans available for grandchildren? And if so, how does it affect financial aid? And Dennis wanted to know, as grandparents, is it better for us or the child to own the account? To answer the first question, yes, they are available for grandchildren. It's a very popular savings tool for grandparents. It's a great way to kind of leave your legacy to the child for their education and maybe also get some tax benefits out of it too. As far as who should own the account, there are some benefits to having it in the grandparent's name. First of all, the grandparent will retain control of the account. And that means you'll be able to take the money back if needed. And that's going to differ from other ways of giving money. Obviously, if you just gave your grandchild a check, you're not going to be able to take that money back. But with a 529 plan, you retain the control of the account, but the money leaves your estate. The grandparent also may be able to claim a state tax deduction depending on where they live. As Matt mentioned, there's over 30 states that offer a state tax deduction or credit for your 529 plan contributions. Depending on the state, some states require that only the account owner can get the deduction. Some say that anyone who contributes. So if you're a grandparent, whether you're owning the account or not, or you're just making contributions to a parent-owned account, it's a smart idea to check with your state and look up those rules for that tax benefit to see if you're eligible. The thing you want to be careful with, though, is if the grandparent does own the account, that's where the financial aid implications come in. So the funds withdrawn from a grandparent-owned 529 to pay for college is going to count as student income on the FAFSA, and that could be assessed at up to 50%. So that means if a grandfather wanted to give $10,000 to help pay for college, it could reduce the financial aid by as much as $5,000. So of course you want to avoid this. Your intentions are not to give the child half of the gift that you wanted to. So we do have a couple ways to avoid it. First, you can wait until January 1st of the child's sophomore year of college to pay the tuition. This only works if the grandchild is graduating in 4 years, but the FAFSA does look at income from 2 years prior. So if you wait until the second semester of sophomore year and they're going to graduate in 4 years, you should be in the clear. Another strategy is to roll the money from the grandparent's 529 to a parent-owned 529, 1 year's worth of tuition at a time. And if you wait until after the FAFSA is filed to transfer the funds from the grandparent 529 to the parent 529, then it won't be reported on the FAFSA. You just have to be sure to spend the money to pay the tuition before the next year's FAFSA comes around. So that's a little tricky, but it is a way to get around it. Also, if you're going to do that, be sure to open the parent 529 in the same state as the grandparent 529, because some 529 plans do have recapture rules when you roll over the funds to a different state's plan. So that means grandparents, if you had been collecting some kind of tax benefit and then you roll the plan over into a different state's plan for the parent, you might be subject to recapture on those state tax benefits. These past two slides focus on the FAFSA, which we mentioned is the free application for federal student aid. There's also another form that a few of the selective private schools use called the CSS profile. Those schools are going to have different rules when it comes to 529s, and there's no blanket statement for that. You're going to have to check with the individual school's rules. But so once again, I'll just say that these rules that we're talking about now apply only for the FAFSA. So I'm sure there's some questions on financial aid. I know I saw a few coming through, but Matt, if you want to go ahead and ask those now.
Katie, let's make sure, because I know we do have kind of two sections left. Let's go ahead and try to make sure we're getting through all the meat of stuff, and then if need be, we can kind of go through some questions at the end if we have some time.
Sounds good. Okay, then we'll get into withdrawals. Contributing to your 529 account is easy. But what happens when it's time to pay for college? We get a lot of questions on this topic because, after all those years of savings, no one wants to get stuck paying taxes or penalty on their earnings. And I know this is a concern with a lot of parents, hesitant to open an account. So first, how much should you withdraw? When Rebecca asked before the webinar, how do I avoid taxes and penalties when withdrawing? So what you want to do first is add up all of your qualified education expenses. And that's, we talked about that earlier. That includes college tuition, computers for college, some room and board costs, and then also $10,000, up to $10,000 per year per beneficiary for K through 12 tuition. So those all count. Then you want to subtract any tax-free educational assistance. And then also, I know we got a question on this earlier, you want to subtract anything that was generated to claim the American Opportunity Tax Credit or the Lifetime Learning Credit. Remember, there's no double dipping. So for example, if you're eligible to claim the American Opportunity Tax Credit, that means you can use up to $4,000 in qualified expenses to claim a $2,500 tax credit. So you want to make sure you subtract that $4,000 and don't withdraw that from your 529 plan. A lot of other people, and what you'll get after that equation is you're going to get the amount of qualified education expenses. That will be your amount of your tax-free distribution. Anything over that amount is going to be considered non-qualified, in which you will owe income tax as well as a 10% penalty on the earnings portion only of the withdrawal. The contributions that you put into the account will never be taxed or penalized since you made those with after-tax money. Jennifer and a whole bunch of other people have asked what happens if the child gets a scholarship. And then also we've received the question about military school and trade school. So if you have leftover funds in your 529 because your student got a scholarship, you can withdraw the amount of the tax-free scholarship without penalty, but the earnings portion is going to be taxed as ordinary income. So if you don't want to pay any taxes, you can either change the beneficiary in the account to another family member who will use the funds for college, or keep the money in the account to use for grad school or something else. But if you do want to take it out, you're going to have to pay income tax on that earnings portion. And the same is true if your child decides to attend a U.S. military academy. You can withdraw the funds without penalty, but you'll have that income tax on the earnings portion. And then best way to withdraw. So withdrawals are going to have to match up with the qualified expenses that are incurred in the same year. So for example, don't make a withdrawal in December to pay your spring tuition. You might get stuck with, things not matching up, and you might end up with a non-qualified withdrawal. So, and also we recommend paying the distribution to the beneficiary. If there are any non-qualified withdrawals, they're going to be taxed at the beneficiary's presumably lower tax rate. And keeping away from the school will help avoid any complication with the bursar's office. So those payments can be made by check, ACH deposit, and sometimes even an electronic payment to the school. Dom had asked, what happens if the child doesn't attend college? Well, as we mentioned this a couple times, you can change it to another family member, or save the funds for a grandchild. There's a whole bunch of different options, but if you really do need to take the money out and you just don't think any of those options are for you, The only thing you have to worry about is a 10% penalty and then income tax on the earnings portion of the withdrawal. So I'll just stress that again. You can take the money out at any time for any reason. You just will have that penalty and the income tax to worry about. Okay, if there's no questions, I'll move on.
Real quickly, Katie, as I think this is an important one. Stephen asked, if I'm making an error when withdrawing, can I redeposit that to avoid any kind of penalties or taxes?
Recontributions need to be made within 60 days, and that's a newer development. That law was passed, I believe, maybe last year. But yeah, so you have 60 days to make a recontribution, and that also is the case if your child drops out of school and you get a refund from the school. So you have 60 days to redeposit that money into the 529 without tax consequences.
All right, great. So let's just go over the new tax law, and then if we have some time, we'll take some last questions here.
Sure, we'll go through this pretty quickly. I know we received a lot of questions before the webinar about the new tax reform and 529 plans. So the biggest development is that you can now use your 529 plan to pay for K through 12 education, which is, you know, K through 12 education can be just as expensive as some colleges for some families. This is big news. Up to $10,000 per year per beneficiary can be withdrawn tax-free to pay for private, public, and religious elementary and high schools. It's important to mention this is tuition only. So other expenses, you're going to have to either, you know, you can use a Coverdell ESA or just use your savings account. But for now, tuition only. So you'll save on federal taxes for those expenses. And then you may also qualify for an additional state tax break. However, not all states have conformed to this new law. So it's important to mention that there are some states, including Illinois and New York, where it is up in the air right now whether or not they're going to offer that tax benefit if you use your 529 for K through 12 education. So everyone, you just need to check with your individual state's rules before you assume that you can take that tax deduction, because if your state considers it a non-qualified withdrawal, you'll again be subject to that penalty and taxes. It's also important to note that California, even though they don't offer any kind of state tax benefit for contributions, they have not conformed to this new tax reform. So if you are in California and you use your plan to pay for K through 12, they're going to charge you a 2.5% penalty, a state tax penalty on the earnings. So just keep an eye out, and many states have conformed. So we actually have a list on savingforcollege.com, so you can go ahead and check that. You know, people ask, is there any reason not to use a 529 plan to save for K through 12? A couple of the reasons are, you know, the biggest advantage of 529s is that tax-free earnings growth. And even if you save for college, you only have 18 years for your money to grow. So once you start taking that out early, you're missing out on those potential gains. And then also it could really affect your college saving strategy, because 529 plans, the investment managers are trying to maximize college savings. That's what they were designed for. So we might see some new investment options come out in the future that are geared more towards K through 12. But for now, if you're going to do that, you should just check your investment strategy and make sure that everything's aligned. And then also on Monday, Tax Reform 2.0, the House Ways and Means Committee released legislative language for Tax Reform 2.0, and this includes a couple exciting provisions for 529 plans. They want to expand the benefit of K through 12 qualified expenses to beyond tuition. So we listed a couple of the things here. This can include books, supplies, other equipment, and also homeschooling costs. I know that was a big concern for some families. So if this passes, homeschooling costs will also be a qualified expense. And then also apprenticeship programs, so the costs associated with those. And then big news for everyone, up to $10,000 would be able to withdraw tax-free to make student loan payments for the beneficiary. So if you have leftover money and you had borrowed some to pay for college, this new law would let you take out $10,000 tax-free to pay for those loans. So I know we're coming up at the very end, Matt, but if we want to take a couple questions, probably take one or two.
Katie, what I was going to say, because I'm looking at all these questions here, and I know we're kind of out of time, would be that pretty much every single question in here, guys, can be answered on savingforcollege.com. I promise that there is an article or a calculator or something that will answer all of your questions here, everything down to your personal questions about if I put in this much, how much do I get, or what happens in my state. We have everything for it, so I encourage everybody to go visit there, explore around. If you do want to keep up with everything, create an account. We do send out up-to-date articles. When our new calculators come out, we'll make sure that you guys get them. So I'm sorry that we couldn't get through anything. This has been a great webinar. I think this is some of the most questions we've ever seen, Katie. So sorry we couldn't get to all of them, but I highly encourage everyone to check out savingforcollege.com because the answers will be there.
Right, and I know a lot of you had asked if we're going to be sending out the slides, and we can do that, and we'll also send out a recording of the presentation for anyone that didn't catch the whole thing or if you missed it. You know what, Matt? We forgot to announce the winner of the book. The winner of our updated book is Patricia Hilton. So Patricia, I will be sending you an email following the presentation, and we'll arrange to get that sent out to you. So yeah, thanks everyone for joining us. And if anyone has questions, as Matt said, just please visit savingforcollege.com. We have a forum. We have plenty of content on the site that should answer all the questions you have.
Thank you very much, everybody.